Welcome to another VICII session tonight. Tonight we're talking about a very controversial yet a very current topic. We're talking about Gaza, a city located in the very troublesome and recently troublesome area of Israel and Palestine. And we have with us to lead the discussion two experts in this Middle Eastern turmoil. One is the former mayor of Burlington, Peter Clavel, who served, I don't know how many terms, Peter, a lot of them, and who traveled to the Middle East in 1991 with Musa Issac when we established a sister city. We were one of the first sister cities in the United States to have a sister city in Palestine. And that sister city has existed to this day. That's the city of Bethlehem. Also, we have a sister city in Arad in Israel. And Mayor Clavel facilitated that, as well as being an incredibly educated and decent mayor. And the second person that we have speaking is Musa Issac, another very well-educated person. I don't need to go into all his credentials, but he is the current president of the sister city in Burlington, the sister city being Burlington, Bethlehem, Arad. Musa was born in Palestine, grew up in Palestine, and is with us tonight to talk about the current situation with Mayor Clavel, who has served and worked. Mayor Clavel served and worked in Gaza, so he knows a great deal about that city. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Musa Issac right now and welcome everybody, and thank you all for being here. Musa. Can't hear him. Musa, you're muted here. I think Musa needs to be unmuted.
Okay, let me figure it out.
Unmuted now.
Okay.
Are we okay? I just want to start by thanking Sandy and Beth and the VICII team for inviting Mayor Clavel and myself to comment on the tough and sad situation in Gaza, in Israel and Palestine. I want to state from the outset that the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians has absolutely nothing to do with religion. You know, I always like to stress that. It has everything to do with the domination and supremacy of one group over another, including land and resources. The fact is that Israel now dominates the Palestinians and controls all of historic Palestine. My father was born in a village on the West Bank and had only a 6th grade education before he had to work to support his family. But he was the wisest person in my life. He once heard a group of us in Vermont struggling to understand how people who had been abused by persecution, pogroms, and wars could become occupiers and abuse others. In his simple way, so we were struggling with that. You know, how could that happen? In his simple way, my dad said that this issue has nothing to do with any of that. He said that Jews who came to Palestine beginning in the 19th century came as Europeans, and they mistreated the indigenous people as Europeans did all indigenous people everywhere, whether in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, the US, Canada, or elsewhere. Indigenous people were portrayed as backward and savages, sounds familiar, not deserving sovereignty or independence. Their lands and resources were fair game. Does this sound familiar to us? It does to me. All these settler colonial systems justified their brutality with high-minded phrases that had religious overtones. Manifest destiny, civilizing mission, God and my right. God and my right was the motto for the British Empire as it was occupying the whole world. Our topic tonight is Gaza, and to understand what has happened there, we need to think about it in context. First, who are the Gazans? When Israel was established largely with the help of Western powers in 1947, 1948, in historic Palestine, about 3/4 of the Palestinian population were driven out, 750,000 of them, and over 500 of their villages were totally demolished to prevent their return. Most of the people living in Gaza today, 2.1 million, are Palestinians and their descendants who were driven out of southern Palestine. People who live in central Palestine were driven into Jordan, and Palestinians from the north were driven into Lebanon and Syria. Some in the north managed to stay in their villages, and we can discuss that if we have time. How did that happen? And very, very few returned. And they are the basis for the Israeli-Palestinian citizens today, who number about 2 million people, about 21% of the Israeli population. And Gaza, when you look at the map, so thank you, Ian. When you look at the map, you will see that Gaza is very small geographic area, only about, I want to stress, 25 miles long by less than 8 miles wide. It is from here to before Montpelier. It doesn't make it to Montpelier, by 8 miles wide, with a sea coast. Into that small area are crammed 2.1 million people, making it one of the most densely populated places on earth. When Israel withdrew its settlers in 2005 from the 21 settlements that managed to stuff in there, it had established in Gaza, it set about building a barrier around the territory. And since 2007, there has been a blockade on Gaza by land, air, and sea, maintained by Israel with the help of Egypt. So Gaza does not control its borders at all. When you see Gaza being bombed, the first thing we should understand is that there is nowhere Gazans can go to escape from danger. We saw this particularly during the May 21 Israeli offensive a couple months ago, in which the bombardments were random and a new kind of bomb was tested. I really believe Gaza is being used as a test site, bombing runs that caused the wholesale destruction of entire buildings. 2,000-pound GBU-31 bunker busters, US supplied F-16s and F-35s were used. In all, Israel mounted 1,500 airstrikes against Gaza in 11 days, injuring 1,900 Palestinians, killing at least 254, including 66 children. Israel lost 13 people, including 2 children, to Hamas-fired rockets. The economic damage to Israel is staggering. To Gaza, I mean, is staggering. Some 290 to 380 million, with housing, health, education, and social services bearing the brunt of the destruction. Some 1,800 residential units were destroyed, with another 1,300 partially destroyed, forcing tens of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza to take refuge in UN schools. About 30 healthcare facilities were damaged, including the only COVID testing facility. The Israeli military term for this is mowing the lawn. So hit at Hamas-governed targets periodically to weaken their military capacity. So the question is, what happened in May 2021, 2 months ago, to set off this latest round of violence? We have to go to Jerusalem for the answer to this. East Jerusalem was annexed by Israel in 1980 after it was occupied in 1967. The United Nations is applying international law, continues to regard East Jerusalem as occupied territories. According to the Geneva Conventions, occupiers are not allowed to transfer populations in or out of the occupied territories. Israel has flouted this since its establishment. Today in Jerusalem, Israel is building a biblical theme park. This is all to explain. It's really simple to explain. It's building a biblical theme park on the southern part of the old city. And it wants to expropriate and then destroy 1,500 homes of Palestinians living in the area of Silwan. So remember these names, you will hear them. Silwan is one town where massive destruction is happening. In addition, Israel is working to condemn and destroy the homes of a number of Palestinians who live in the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah, in ongoing effort, which is on the east of the old city. It's all an effort to Judaize Jerusalem. This is ethnic cleansing, and it is happening in real time. What is happening in Jerusalem today is the spark that lit the conflagration in May. Palestinians in Jerusalem, the West Bank, and even Palestinian citizens of Israel protested these actions. Israel brutally crushed these demonstrations, and Hamas, the Palestinian political party that governs Gaza, took advantage of the opportunity and fired rockets into Israel. The Israeli army, directed by a government that was on the eve of elections, decided to mow the lawn again. Israel now controls all of historic Palestine in any meaningful sense. We should keep in mind there are as many Palestinians there under Israel's control that are Jewish Israelis, about 6.5 million of each, 6.5 million Jewish Israelis and 6.5 million Palestinians. Some 21% of the 8.7 million Israelis are Palestinian citizens, primarily in Galilee in the north. Roughly 4.5 million Palestinians live under Israeli occupation and have lived in these circumstances without political rights of any kind since 1967. That is, I tell people, 54 years. How many more years before people are allowed to be free? You know, it just is going on and on too long. As you can imagine, it is extraordinarily difficult to live under military occupation, as my relatives do in the West Bank, where you cannot feel secure on your own land, or under blockade, siege, and bombardment, as in Gaza, or under the constant threat of expropriation, as in East Jerusalem. It is also very difficult to live as a second-class citizen under an apartheid system where more than 70 codified laws privilege, and this is for the lawyers and all people who really are interested, they should check these laws. These are codified laws specific to privilege one specific group, that is the Jewish nationals, over everyone else. This is the Palestinian experience today. Israel has divided them into various groups in the West Bank and in Gaza under military occupation, in East Jerusalem under annexation, in Israel as Palestinian citizens, not nationals. And that nationals, remind me, somebody asked the question about what's the difference between national and citizenship under an apartheid system. Although divided into various groups, all Palestinians share the uncertainty of a future in which they are not allowed to participate fully in a free and sovereign system. None of them are living under such a thing. As Americans who want the best for both Israelis and Palestinians, and whose government has a long-standing economic relationship with Israel, 3.8 billion a year in arms sales alone, and stands diplomatically with Israel virtually all of the time, we have a special role to play in what happens next. The expropriation and demolition of homes in Jerusalem and elsewhere that is happening now is ethnic cleansing, and it is happening before our eyes. It is what it is, really. You don't question it. You look at it, you know what it is. We should make our voices heard. If we do not support this to our congressional representatives, the State Department, and the White House, most of all, I urge you to educate yourself, become acquainted with organizations such as Beit Salam, the Israeli human rights organization, which just published a report entitled "A Regime," quote, "a regime of Jewish supremacy from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. This is apartheid," end of quote. That is the title of their report. I urge you to read it. Another excellent source of information is plus, the sign plus 972, an independent, non-profit online magazine owned and operated by a group of Israeli and Palestinian journalists. Excellent source of information about what's happening daily. According to Beit Salam, and I'm very close to finishing here, according to Beit Salam, Israel uses 4 major methods to advance Jewish supremacy: restricting migration to keep the number of Jews going. You know, if you have a an entity for one group that favors one group, you will forever be engaged in population engineering, taking over Palestinian land to build Jewish-only communities, draconian restrictions on movement. One of the laws, there is the absentee laws. We can check these in a couple minutes, you know, in the question and answer. One law I really want to mention before I close: Israel also passed laws from the beginning allowing communities with admission committees. There are hundreds of them in every town, in every mushav, in every kibbutz, hundreds of them all over Israel, to reject Palestinian applicants on the basis of cultural incompatibility or social unsuitability. If we use these language in our country here, we would be not very happy. Supposedly, any Israeli citizen can live in any city. In practice, Israel, I don't know how many people know this, is 92% segregated. 20% of the population is Palestinian. It's 92% segregated. 8% about live in mixed cities like Haifa and Lud and Jaffa. However, those people in the mixed cities are living in segregated, distinct, what do you call it, neighborhoods. And when you have all the mushavs, the kibbutz, 90% of Israeli towns are exclusively Jewish. Guess where the resources, when the state is allocating resources, guess where the resources are going? So the Israeli Palestinian citizens are impoverished. They are stuck in towns in Nazareth, basically, with no room to expand. And I will stop there and we'll discuss it further later in question and answer. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Musa. I would love to hear from Peter Clavel, who is the mayor who established the sister cities and traveled to the Middle East, Israel and Palestine with me and with colleague Roz Payne and Joe Bornstein, if you all remember that, right, Peter? Anyway, here's the mayor who did all that, Mayor Clavel.
So if I could give a bit more context for my understanding of Gaza. One is a disclaimer: I don't claim to be an expert, but on the other hand, I'm probably one of few Vermonters who have spent more than a month living and working in Gaza. In my first exposure to Gaza was in 1994. Some of you may recall that after serving 2 terms as mayor, I lost an election. I took a break from politics, and Gaza was my first engagement in international development. I came back and was reelected a number of times after this in 1995, went on to serve an additional 5 terms. But it was during this break that I get my first exposure to international development. It whet my appetite. And after leaving the mayor's office in 2006, I went on to work for 15 years in international development for a Burlington-based company, Tetra Tech ARD, primarily implementing USAID projects. So in that role, I returned to the Middle East, and I spent a fair bit of time, not in Gaza, but in Jordan, where I was overseeing and responsible for the management of 2 different projects in Jordan, including a local governance project. So that gave me great exposure to the complexity of the issues and the challenges facing this region. And also, as Sandy mentions, the Burlington Bethlehem Arad relationship began when I was mayor and was finally culminated when I returned to the mayor's office in 1995. And in that capacity, I visited both Israel and the West Bank and our sister city of Bethlehem on at least 4 occasions. Most recently, I was there about 6 years ago. So when I was in Gaza in 1994, a long time ago now, but this was a time of great hope for Gaza. This was the time when the Oslo Accords had been signed. This was the time when Yasser Arafat was returning to Palestine, and Gaza was the provincial capital of the Palestinian authorities, and there was great hope that finally the people of Palestine in Gaza particularly would be able to live in more peaceful, stable, and economically robust environment. And that hope was never realized. But when I was there, I had the responsibility of assessing the capacity of local government. And it was a pretty amazing. It was in 1994 when I was there that they began the phase out of the Israeli occupation of Gaza. And it took about 10 years, but initially they left in very quick terms and they said, okay, it's yours. And so they left nothing behind in terms of equipment and machinery or records. For example, the municipalities that I was working with at the time they had no idea as to how to tax properties, and they had no records in terms of property taxation. The Israelis took everything with them. And so it was a very huge challenge for the people of Gaza to begin the process of managing their own affairs. I remember once speaking to an elderly mayor. I visited virtually all the municipalities of Gaza of any size. And I remember once meeting with an elderly mayor. He was not so elderly for me now, but at the time he seemed elderly. He was about 82 years old, and his youthful assistant was about my age now, 72. And he says, yes, Peter. He says, I am the mayor. I have been for 6 years. And I have a full city council. And I said, Mayor, you're the first mayor that I have met that has a full city council in place. He says, yes, Peter, but the city council is 11 individuals and 6 of them are dead and have been for a very long time. So that could sum up the capacity of local governments in Gaza. And there was a saying in Gaza that continues to this day, which I think is pretty profound. And it said, yesterday is better than today. Today is better than tomorrow because there is no hope. And that says a lot about the psychology, the spirit of the people of Gaza. I mean, I was just astonished as to what a hellhole this place was. I mean, you'd walk through the streets of villages and cities, and raw sewage was on the surface. It was incredible. And people have said it's an open air prison. And to this day, people say that Gaza is occupied. And there's some controversy around this because the Israeli military forces are not actually in Gaza, but everything that the citizens of Gaza need to sustain their existence comes from Israel. You know, fuel, electricity, water is all controlled by Israel. So it is amazing that there's a situation where ostensibly they are free of the occupation by Israeli troops, but they have no control over their destiny. And Ian, just for a moment, if you could draw up this map of Gaza, I'd like to draw a few analogies between Burlington and Chittenden County and Gaza. Ian, do we have that map of Gaza?
Is that a good one?
No,
There, yes.
that's good. So
Okay.
as Musa mentioned, this is a small piece of territory, 25 miles long, on average 6 miles wide. The size of Gaza is 141 square miles. The size of Chittenden County is 619 square miles. So put that in perspective. Gaza, this place of 2.1 million people, is 1/4 the size of Chittenden County. Yet the population is 2.5 versus 165,000 in Chittenden County, one of the most densely populated places on this planet. And most of the people in Gaza, not most, this is not true, but there are 8 refugee camps. And so a good share of the population of Gaza, I think it's about 600,000, live in refugee camps. Then you look at the economics, it's even more profound. The per capita income in Gaza is 3,559 versus Chittenden County, 61,858. So on average, the income of a resident of Chittenden County is 17 times more than a resident of Gaza. So it's a very, very challenging place to live. The unemployment rate in Gaza is about 48% compared to, and it's a little iffy now because of the pandemic, but as of February of this year, Chittenden County was 2.7%. So 48% versus 2.7%. So, and particularly among young people, Gaza has a very young population. Of the 2.1 million people that live there, half of them are below 18. And among youth, the population, the unemployment is particularly high. It's about 70%. So very, very challenging situation. They have little access to clean water. About 800,000 of the population of Gaza have no reliable access to clean water. The electricity in this place that gets god awful hot. So, you can't, there's no air conditioning in most places, certainly, but the electricity is on for only a few hours a day. So, I could go on, but I'll stop there. I think it'd be more productive to have a conversation. But an interesting issue in my mind is the relationship of Hamas to Gaza, and it's very complicated. Of course, they've been declared to be a terrorist organization, but on the other hand, they deliver many of the social services that the people of Gaza depend upon, and I think that's the reason that Hamas continues to have great support among the people of Gaza, in a place where local governments are not delivering services, and in a place when the economic challenges are so intense. One of the few providers of services is the Hamas organization. So why don't we stop there and open it up for conversation?
Okay, Beth, is there something in the chat that I should check? Beth, you're muted. No, okay. All right, any questions? I would like, maybe one of you, maybe Musa, what is Hamas? We all understand that has been declared a terrorist organization. So I have a couple of questions. Hamas is the government of Gaza, is that correct?
Yeah, So here's the deal. When, to put it in the context of the history of Gaza, uh, when the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, Yasser Arafat and company, these were secular people. We're asking for secular things, a secular state. So for Israel, Israel wanted to weaken the secular branch of the Palestinians. They really nurtured Hamas. Hamas has religious overtones. They nurtured them. They allowed money from Qatar to flow in as a counterweight and to fragment the leadership of the Palestinians. That's where it comes from.
But Musa, I do have a follow-up question, if that's okay. Were the people of Hamas elected by the people of Gaza?
At some point,
Okay.
just because what Mayor Clavel mentioned, because Hamas was supplying food and services and all of that, they did run, and the PLO leadership was corrupt compared to them. And they did win an election, and that's where the US and Israel boycotted and what do you call it? Blockaded Gaza.
Okay.
Yep. Hamas is the largest Palestinian militant Islamist group. And much of the controversy around Hamas is embedded in their charter, which expresses a commitment to the destruction of Israel. So the US, the European Union, and many others look at them as a terrorist group, but on the other hand, they are the delivery of the most important social welfare programs to the people of Gaza.
Okay, other questions? I do have a question about the blockade. Would both of you describe what that blockade is and who enforces it against Gaza?
Mayor Clavel, go ahead.
The blockade. What year was the blockade?
It started 2007.
2007.
Yep.
So, Israel pulled out of Gaza in 2005. And shortly thereafter, the blockade was imposed. And it was imposed, interestingly enough, not only by Israel, but by Egypt as well.
Yeah.
Because the situation in Gaza was so desperate that the flow of folks outside of Gaza into both Egypt and Israel was viewed as a threat to the national security of those countries. So they threw up this blockade. And as a result of the blockade, there is very little flow of people in goods into Gaza. So right now, after the 11 days of bombardment in May of this year, they're trying to reconstruct Gaza, but they don't have the materials necessary for the reconstruction. The cement, the lumber that is so critical. The fuel, they don't have the fuel going in. So there was a time when people could flow freely in and out of Gaza. Back when I was there, many of the Palestinians worked in agricultural operations in Israel, but that was totally shut down. So it's been a huge impediment to the rehabilitation and redevelopment of Gaza. And if you look at their recommendations in terms of what needs to be done to support the people of Gaza, one of the key recommendations is to remove the restrictions on the movement of people and goods to and from Gaza.
And that is not in the offing, is it? Is any kind of
No.
discussion about lifting the Musa?
No, if I may add, I just want to stress, when Israel pulled out its soldiers, as Jeff Halper, who's an Israeli citizen and activist, says, Israel said, oh, I don't need to be in there tackling it, one by one. I'm going to control the jail. So the police or the jailers control 5% of the jail. The prisoners control 90% of the prison, but the prison is still controlled by, the perimeter of Gaza is totally, the air, the sea, the borders are controlled by Israel. The one side, the one exit that is in Egypt is controlled by Egypt. Egypt has two issues. One is they are really afraid because Israel will keep bombing him until they go somewhere. And Israel is afraid that they will end up with all of Gazans, flooding into Egypt, escaping. And the situation is really awful. The water resources are depleted. And the other one, the Egyptian government is anti, what do you call it? Muslim Brotherhood. Hamas is a Muslim Brotherhood organization, and they do not like them. So it's so Gaza has a double whammy. Egypt is not the controller, but also remember, the US government pays Egypt big bucks, 1.08 billion. It doesn't compare to the 3.8 billion going to Israel, but we bought Egypt. They better, do certain things, like, for example, I'm sure it's behind the scenes to help Israel. And so Gaza is in a terrible place. As Mayor Clavel said, I wouldn't want to live there, want to live there. I actually, as a free citizen, I would not want to live in Israel, as a second or third class citizen. And I wouldn't want to live under occupation in the West Bank. So it's really a horrendous situation. And that is the big picture. Who controls what? Hamas to me is a side issue in the sense, because they exist only because Israel helped them come into existence. And I really believe they would go away if things improve. If the economy improves, if as Mayor Clavel said, if the borders are open for free movement. In Gaza, they cannot go to university. They cannot get out of Gaza. Students, they want to go to Egypt, or they want to go to Jordan or the West Bank to universities. They can't.
In other words,
So
they
it's
can't travel. They can't travel at
can't
all.
travel
Can't
anywhere.
travel. It's called an open air prison.
Yes.
I mean, that's typically how Gaza is done. You can't get in, you can't get out. Not only can't you get in and out, but electricity does not flow, water does not flow, fuel does not flow. More than 60% of the people in Gaza are living a life of food insecurity. They don't have enough food for their family. It's a very youthful population. It's one of the most youthful populations of anywhere. But there's just no hope. And then there's no great wonderment that there's such despair, and they revert to violence and responses to the Israelis. It's a very, very challenging, difficult situation.
Ian.
Yeah. So Peter mentioned that roughly 2/3 of the population of Gaza are refugees and are recognized by the United Nations as refugees. And one of the main demands of Palestinian people, I think, is the right of return of refugees. I mean, those refugees in Gaza, they were people who left what is now Israel in 1948. So according to international law, those refugees have the right of return, but I know that Israel is trying hard, I think maybe with the help of others, to declare that the descendants of refugees, of those 1948 refugees, should not be classified as refugees. So this is maybe Israel's attempt to get a sort of a time expiration on the issue of refugees. So could the panelists comment on that issue of the potential resolution of this problem of Palestinian refugees.
Peter, you wanna?
No, you go ahead. I mean,
Yeah.
the challenges that are faced by the people of Gaza, and to a lesser extent by those of the West Bank, are so immense that the whole notion of the right to return is so far out there that it's a faraway dream at best. I mean, there's no steps that are being taken to actualize that right to return. And you know, the first time that I went to the West Bank and visited a refugee camp, I see all these keys hanging out there. I says, you know, what does that mean? Well, that's the key to my home, and I'm going to return one day. And people were fervent about it, but this was 50 years ago that they were forced out, more than 50 years ago now, that they were forced out of their home, and there's no indication that they're ever going to be able to return. Of all the issues that are the challenges facing the region, the right to return is probably the most difficult and the one that's least likely to be achieved. And that, in the status of Jerusalem as the capital, and the idea that this would become a Palestinian capital, at least East Jerusalem, is very, very challenging.
You know, I'll just add very quickly. I'll add to from day one, Israel did not want any Palestinians to stay in Palestine. They wanted all of them out, and they immediately enacted the law of return, which applies only to Jews. So now I am a descendant of Palestinians. My Jewish neighbor in the United States, we live equally under the law. In 12 hours, we can get on an airplane. In 12 hours, we land in Israel. We are equal and buddy here. We get there. The person who's Jewish will be treated like a king and queen, and I will be treated like, even with an American citizen, not very badly, and will never be allowed. You know, I was born there. My ancestors go back to time immemorial. I will not be able to stay more than 3 months, and I will be monitored very closely. As an American citizen, I cannot stay. So these laws are crazy, you know, they are, and eventually many Jews are opening up their eyes. Young Jews are finding out about all of these laws they did not know about. I really believe on the long run, it's not sustainable. And the only solution is equality. You know, I'm not talking about one state, two state, or whatever. Dignity for both people, the only way. And then it will be, you know, people flow in and out, and Israeli, Jewish, Palestinian, you know, there are millions of Palestinians out who will not be able to go back ever, the way it's constructed now. But that's not sustainable. And that's what I believe. It's
And Musa, you may know the details of this, but there was hope that the new government of Israeli, now that Netanyahu's out of there, would be more favorable to granting certain rights to Palestinians. But there was a vote just this past week before the Israeli parliament, which would have extended a law allowing Israeli Arabs who are married to stay in Israel or to enter Israel, and the parliament refused to extend that law.
So they are, Israel is so, you know, this is population engineering. You know, if you have one group favored, you are going to be forever engaged in population engineering, which is evil. So what happens is, if an Israeli, Jewish or Palestinian citizen of Israel marries a Palestinian from the West Bank, they cannot bring their spouse into Israel to live. They would have to leave the country. Period. End of story. And what Mayor Clavel is talking about, they were trying to pass a law to ease that restriction. So it is, when you study the laws, you will see it's all calculated and aimed at eliminating the indigenous people, pushing them out, not allowing them back in, and bringing as many of the desirable people in. That is, if people really understood that, would not be very happy with it, and Jews or otherwise. If we take these laws and just say, oh, this country is superior, the nationality is for the whites and citizenship is for everybody else, people would not accept that. And that's exactly what's happening in Israel. By the way, I just want to mention this. Citizenship in Israel, Supreme Court of Israel many times was tackled. They said nationality is superior to citizenship. So citizenship grants you being there. Nationality grants you resources and you are number one. And study that, please, the lawyers amongst us, study those laws. They are discriminatory big time.
I have a question about that, Musa, but maybe other people have.
There are other people, you know, I
right.
noticed
I don't notice, I don't see them, so.
Robin or
Somebody who
Mark.
sees them calling them, right? Beth?
Mark Estran?
Yeah, can you hear me? Yes, you can hear
Yes.
me. Just a comment about Peter's characterization of hopelessness. There's a wonderful line from Mahmoud Darwish, the great Palestinian poet, and he talks about the incurable malady of hope. As characterizing
Resilient.
the Palestinian
That's,
people.
yep.
I hear that in what Musa says, in the way he talk, or the way Musa talks about it. But I would also just like to ask about. I was under the impression that in the Hamas charter, the demand for the disappearance of Israel from the map was changed. That's no longer in the Hamas charter, and that people keep talking about it as if it is. They keep that as an accusation, and that is no longer the case. Does anybody know if that's correct? I mean, I don't think I made that up.
I think you are right.
Yeah, I do too.
You know, before Hamas came into existence with the help of Israel, I want to stress that Israel accused the PLO of the same stuff, and so it doesn't matter who's there. The project goes on, and I don't think it can. I really don't think it's sustainable. It really isn't, because you cannot hide all of these laws from people forever. You know, good people, Jews, otherwise. People are going to find out, and they are finding out, and they are saying this is not good. And I believe in transformation. I really believe it's sooner, maybe not in my lifetime, I hope it is, that the whole thing will be transformed into a good system, a state for all of its citizens, where everybody is equal under the law, not the way it is now. I think
incurable malady of hope.
yes, I have that melody.
We all do.
Samud.
Robin.
Yeah, okay. I'm wondering when it was that the people of Gaza voted to support Hamas, how many years ago that was? Can there be new elections? And I want to say that my organization, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, WILF, has our platform is our effort is to take Hamas off of the terrorist list. That how can there be, you know, international efforts at peace if the government is viewed as the government which was elected by the people is viewed as a terrorist organization. And we have not gotten much traction on that. I think people are afraid to say that Hamas should be taken off the terrorism list.
But the
Right.
charge there, the main charge, is about the Hamas call for Israel to be no longer on the map, meaning the government of Israel, and that is no longer there unless somebody knows differently. I'm pretty sure that that's not in the charter anymore. So it's phony.
Right. I'll tell you this. Even if you remove Hamas now, they disappear totally out of Gaza. Nothing will change the way Israel is constructed. They do not want those Palestinians anywhere near Israel. They want them stuffed where they are. And if possibly, I ask always question, why would anyone continue to harangue the people in the West Bank, 600 checkpoints, making their life miserable every second of the day, going to the hospital, going to work, going to anywhere. You are confronted by Israeli soldiers who control everything you do, and they can mess up your plans every single day. Why would you do that to a population if you are not intending to drive them out? That's really, and I don't think it's going to work. Israel is stuck in a situation where they wanted to get rid of all the Palestinians. They are not able to. It's not. It's not.
I told you that I was looking, and then as I said that, I was like, well, I'm looking for mine.
Can somebody?
I don't know what that is. Beth, do you? Does anybody?
I can't tell who it is.
Can somebody?
Jean,
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
Anyway.
I can't tell.
Yeah. Anyway, I really believe the only way to solve this problem and start shoving it in the right direction is international pressure, like happened in South Africa, to transform it into something better than it is now. It is the only way. People don't give up their privilege very easily, as we find out here, in amongst us in the United States. We still are struggling with people who believe they are supreme to everybody else. And so the only way is for the Palestinians, and I think they are there, they believe it will never be homogeneous Palestinian country. And for the Israelis to believe, to come under pressure, to believe that it will not be a homogeneous Jewish country. And when we arrive at that, and then everybody is respected and treated equally under the law, a state for all its citizens, good things will happen. But I don't see good things happening the way it's constructed without the pressure of the international community.
but Musa, do you support taking Hamas off the terrorist?
To me, it's a side issue. It really is. I'm not. I'll tell you, me personally, I'll just tell you this honestly. I'm not into any organization that has religious overtones. But Hamas is not the issue. If they decide to do that, that's fine. It doesn't impact me. I don't, for example, Hamas would like an Islamic state. I'm not into that. So whatever happens,
You're not into a Christian state.
But
I'm not into a Christian state or a Jewish state, by the way, because
it's elected by the people.
right,
People want that.
right.
They
Yeah,
should
it's
be able to have it. That's my point.
if you elect a party, it happens to us all the time. We elect a party, or somebody gets elected and we don't like them very much, like what happened. And if you have good elections, you'll get rid of them eventually. And so, yeah, I'm for free elections. And whoever gets in, and then hopefully it gets sorted out with good elections and good system. But we don't have a good system, and we don't have elections. It's not allowed.
They were elected in
Musa, can I
2000.
just say, we had a question that came into me today that I need to ask from an old friend of yours, Eric Jacobson.
Okay.
Remember him from years back? He now lives
Yes.
in Montpelier. Anyway, his question was to you directly, Musa, because he knows you and is a friend of yours. What hope do you have in the young Jewish population in our country?
A great deal. It's changing big time. Here, I'll tell you what is happening. Israel now is, and this is the dichotomy. Israel now is, I'm talking about the political elite. They are aligning themselves with the fundamentalist movement in our country because they believe they are more the fundamentalist Christian movement in our country and the supremacist because they really believe they are more loyal to Israel than the young Jewish population. So I have a great deal of hope in young Jews. It's already, look at Jewish Voice for Peace and many organizations that are Jewish who are battling the old establishment of, let me call it tribal establishment, my tribe or your tribe. And I'm telling you, no tribe will win. I tell people, if you are dependent or hoping your tribe will win, no tribe will win. The only way we are going to win, all of us, is by transforming the system. It's much bigger than Hamas and Israel and the PLO. Transforming the system into a good system where it is based on equality. That's the only way out of this mess.
How about you, Peter? Do you feel hope in the younger generation, particularly of the younger Jewish generation of our country? Is Peter still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah, I think there's cause for hope. Yes.
Tell me what it is.
Jane had a question in the chat.
Okay, Jane?
Jane, do you want me to just go ahead and ask it?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I'm trying to work at the same time. Yeah, what has it been first I wanted to say that I put this out on Front Porch Forum and got two responses. Somebody wanted people thought I was Sandy. I put her name and number and a couple of people emailed me back. So this is something of interest in the community, and I hope that anyways. And I have to call someone back. I sent the other one your website. And then, okay, the question is, what has been the position of the United Nations on this?
Peter, you work for the UN, and anyway, can you comment on that?
United Nations has been absolutely solid on this. 67 borders must be restored, including East Jerusalem, still considered an occupied territories. Gaza and the West Bank, all of the West Bank. Now, the West Bank and the Golan Heights, by the way, we forget about the Golan Heights. What Israel did to the Golan Heights, there were 97 villages. They destroyed, only 3 left. That's what they did in 1948 to Palestine. And we forget about the Golan Heights, we shouldn't. But yeah, I mean, United Nations is clear that it has to be negotiated and resolved. It's occupied territories.
There's an annual vote. There's an annual vote in the United Nations. Right. In the Security Council, the United States blocks any movement and or vote about Israel. Yes. And in the General Assembly, the votes are usually 180 to 3, like that. U.S., Israel, about ending the occupation and all of that. It happens, it goes around and around, and we are able to block any action because of our veto power in the Security Council.
Right.
Okay, I think we have time for a couple more questions, and I guess I have. So in terms of any kind of peace process, what do both of you think? Is there any possibility of a continued peace process? What's happening? Yeah, Peter.
Peter.
Yeah, that question's probably beyond my pay grade, but it seems like what the immediate focus needs to be is to provide humanitarian aid and rehabilitation aid to Gaza to help them to recover from those 11 days of bombardment in May. So I think that before you talk about peace, I think there needs to be a restoration, and there needs to be financing from donors for the reconstruction of Gaza. There needs to be efforts to remove the barriers that are preventing the exchange of not only people, but of the most basic goods, you know, fuel and food and reconstruction materials. There's a lot of discussion about humanitarian aid, which would provide direct cash assistance to the residents of Gaza to help them in that recovery. Then also there's a great need for providing medical assistance. Those who are in need of medical assistance, they need to have the right to transfer to places where they can get that assistance, Egypt or even Israel. But I think that those immediate issues need to be addressed before there is broad talk of peace.
Yeah, the blockade has to end. I mean, that's what Mayor Clavel is saying. The blockade is what's choking Gaza. And as many Israeli peace people say, Israel is actually measuring how much is needed to go into Gaza to keep them from totally starving, just barely enough. That's what the calculation is. And as long as that exists, so no, there is no peace process. Oslo was a fake peace process. And as I said, the only way it's gonna change and transform is for all of us to work to raise our voices that this is an unacceptable system. It's a supremacist system. It has to transform into something better. You know, stop the ethnic cleansing in Jerusalem. We have to speak to our representatives, the State Department, and to the White House, which are always, you know, in our reps are fantastic, by the way. I must say that. Senator Leahy, Senator Sanders, and Representative Walsh, they are very good on all issues, you know. And but we need to raise our voices as American citizens to transform this. It's not, you know, people tell you, oh, it's a complex issue, stay away from it. It has religion, and this has nothing to do with any of the above. It has with one group dominating the other, like South Africa. We have to end it. We have to transform it. That's the only way it's going to happen.
But that's
And
what the
meanwhile-
BDS movement. That's
Yes.
what the BDS movement is.
That's
going for.
exactly like what happened to South Africa. That's when they transformed. When especially, and the last to come with South Africa, by the way, the last to come to the boycott was America and Israel.
Yep.
To the table, you know, with South Africa.
To support the boycott.
To support, yeah. So I really believe my hope is large, you know, in young Jews, in young people everywhere, and us. You know, I'm not giving up hope on our age people. We have to raise our voices and you know, move things along. Peace process, there is no such thing, and it has to be forced. It has to be imposed. I really believe that on both sides.
If somebody else have a final question, because we're running out of time, but I do want one question. I read a New York Review of Books article this week about stating that this last bombardment of Gaza was more or less a victory for the Palestinians, because all of the Palestinians seem to be joining together in their resistance and in their resistance to the bombardment of Gaza. In other words, the Palestinians in Gaza on the West Bank, and also the Palestinians who are citizens of Israel or second class. Is there anything to that? Did Israel suffer at all in its image and in any way in this last bombing of Gaza?
Yes, I believe I wouldn't talk about victories on any side, because this is a disaster for both the Palestinians and the Israelis. Israel, every time it does these horrible things, it does end up losing some of its image, polished image that they work very hard on polishing. So I believe, as I said before, it's not sustainable, and it has to change. You know, that's.
Hamid has a question.
Yeah, Hamid, There is a question by Hamid, somebody on, what's the question?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Musa. Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
You're fine.
Yes.
Right. I just have a very brief comment on the new Israeli government and their drive to peace or lack of, and on the peace and justice thing. I see that there's a huge attempt by the media here to try to paint a bright picture of the new Israeli government as potentially the government that will bring peace and resolve the issues. Now, I mean, as we all know by now, Bennett is more extreme than Netanyahu. I mean, when Netanyahu was on the far right, Bennett was farther to the right. He's the guy who says, I killed so many Arabs and there is no problem with that. So his government is the one that opposed and insisted on the restrictions on, there was a question about easing the sort of Palestinian marine, the relatives from outside Israel, bringing them in. There is a law that says no. And there was a drive to ease that law. And his government was the one that pushing for the law to stay. It's the beneath government. So it's like, I know the Hasbara is trying to paint a bright picture of that man and his government, but I think we should be careful about that because the reality is different. And I also, on the question of peace and will there be a peace or not? I've always maintained, and I still do, and I know history will do that, has illustrated to us over and again, that there is no peace without justice.
Right.
And the Israeli government has never been interested in peace. I mean, since 1991, they started negotiating, 1993 Oslo, and since Oslo onward, we are asking the Palestinian community on the table. Israel is not interested in peace that will not be anything but subjugating the Palestinian population, enslaving the Palestinian population, taking the land, having the Palestinian population as free labor and cheap labor for them, and a market for the Israeli economy. That is peace for the Israelis, nothing else. So if we are talking about, peace, I think justice has to be realized. And I think someone said, BDS is the way to go. I think BDS is the way South Africa apartheid regime was brought down to its knees. And it was not the government of the United States, and it was not the government of Britain. It was the people who did. And the people who forced that. It was the cultural movement, the scientific movement, the academic movement, the people going to the markets, boycotting the South Africa products. And I think, that is what is going to bring justice and peace. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Hamid.
I think we are out of time, unfortunately. This is a discussion that I believe has been incredibly important, and I believe it really should be extended and more conversations like this should happen. I think with that, does anybody, Musa or Peter, have final comments? And then I think we'll close for the evening and hope we can all get back together again sometime soon.
Peter?
Peter?
No, thank you for the opportunity to participate. It gave me an opportunity to reflect on the challenges before Gaza, and they're immense. They're immense.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for establishing our sister city so many years ago, and Musa also. Thank you,
Yeah,
Musa.
thank you all, for VICII, for getting us together on this important subject, and we'll continue the discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Night. Thank you. Night. Can you do that?
The recording has